Shall we go ahead and get started?
Sounds good, Eric. So first,
All
let
right,
me.
Matt, I'll go ahead.
All right. So I don't know everybody on the call, but I know most of you guys. And so my name, for those who don't know me, is Matt Mearsman, St. Joseph River Basin Commission Director. And I want to thank you all for joining us today. Eric's got an exciting training that I think I set through the very first version of this, maybe 6 or 7 years ago. And I know Eric's done a lot of work on it since. And we got a lot of agricultural land in our watershed. So this is really relevant and important for a lot of the work that we do. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to you, Eric, and thank you all for being here.
So good morning, everybody, and thank you, Matt. I'm Eric Eckel. Water Words That Work is the name of the firm, and we are a public relations and marketing firm that work exclusively with people like yourselves on challenges like we're going to be discussing today. And today's training was developed largely with input from folks like yourselves in Michigan. I hope you're going to find it to be quite useful. I've really noticed over the past few weeks that people are really getting the hang of Zoom, so I'm not going to run through a Zoom tutorial today. And if it seems like you're struggling, I'll do it again for part 2 next week. So the title of this training is Closing the Deal with Rural Landowners. And rural landowners is a big term. It can mean a lot of things, and closing the deal is a lot of things. Now, there is a handout. So I am going to now try and share that handout with everybody. Let's see here. I sent it around yesterday, but just in case, hang on, I got a couple people coming in. I'll send it around as soon as they are in, because otherwise they won't see it. So if you look in the chat box, you'll see there is a handout that you can download if you didn't do it yesterday. And we'll be using that for the exercises and breakout sessions that are peppered throughout the session today. And so here's what the course is all about. Learn the tricks of the trade that dozens of top conservation field staff use to get voluntary conservation projects on the ground. If you need more landowners to take you up on your offer, this course is for you. And I want to thank a few institutions that have helped make it possible. This course was developed over several rounds of work, and the first one was in Michigan, where our clients were the Michigan Department of Agricultural and Rural Development and the Michigan Conservation District Association. It was funded by the Herb Family Foundation. They were all very excited. We were all very excited about the initial results that we got. So we managed to find a second client and a second round of investors to go a little bit deeper. So we've got the Land Trust Alliance was our client, and with the support of the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation and the Foundation for Pennsylvania Watersheds, we were able to deepen and expand upon this course. So I'm grateful to these organizations for making this possible. We're going to do a little exercise where you raise your hands. And by raising your hands, I just mean hitting the yes button under the participants icon. Let's just do a round of hand raising. How many of you are interested in seeing more stream side riparian buffers along the St. Joseph and its tributaries? Hit the yes button if that applies to you. I'm seeing all yeses on that. All right, I'm going to clear. How about converting cropland to perennials or pasture? If that's one of the things you're trying to get done out there, let me see your hands. Let me see the yeses. Yeah, they're starting to pop up. Okay. If you're interested in livestock exclusion and stream bank fencing, let me see you hit that yes button. Mm-hmm. 7 yeses on that one. Okay. No-till and cover crops. See those coming on in. Nutrient management. Last one. How many of you are working with the plain sect? Yes or no? Let me see if you're not working with them and hit the no button. All right. I got 1 yes. I got 5 no's. Okay. Well, then I will skip over the plain sect content in this course because I got quite a bit of it because the second round of work that we did was in Pennsylvania where that is a big concern. All right, so here's the agenda. That was the overview and the acknowledgments and the warm-up. And what's next, I'm going to just introduce you to who our mentors were, the people who helped us put this training together in the first place, and what the course is about. Then we'll spend some time looking at rural landowners and who they are. We'll talk about the data and what the data says about them. Then we'll explore their stories. Then we're going to move into the really important concept, which is the benefits and the barriers of conservation and how you open and close your pitch. And then we'll wrap it up for the day. This is a 3-parter. So if you are getting anything out of our course today or out of the session today, there are 2 more next week and the week after that we hope you'll join us for. And so now here I have a map of Virginia, and this is from 2011. But the point that I'm using this map to make is valid regardless of the year and regardless of the location. So what you see here is this is rural Virginia, or Virginia generally, and you see the counties, and each green dot on this map represents an acre of CREP, the Conservation Reserve Enhancement Program. So you see that in some parts of Virginia, there is a lot of CREP acreage, and on some parts of Virginia, there are not a lot of CREP acres. And what is noteworthy about that is that you see in here are the big agricultural regions in Virginia. This is the Shenandoah Valley here, and that's a big agricultural region. And then we have the south side, and this is a big agricultural region. This is pretty flat farm country. Pretty similar agriculture in this entire area here. And yet we see here in one county, we've got 1,915 acres of CREP. And in the next county over, it's 47. Here we've got 1,055 acres of CREP, and in the next county over, it's 142. Agriculture in these counties is very similar. Agriculture in these counties, very similar. 1,124 acres here in this county, just 17 in the next county over, very similar. Agriculture. So it's not the agriculture that's making the difference. It's not the demographics that's making the difference. The difference is how successfully, how highly functioning the NRCS, FSA, conservation districts, the conservation teams in these counties are performing at a very high level in this county and not performing particularly well in the next county over. The point that this map makes is some people out there working with rural landowners are simply doing a much better job. They're a lot more successful and highly functioning than others. And the point of this course is that we went to people top in their game, field staff from counties like this and not from counties like that. We heard from experts working in this county, not this county. And the big realization as we were putting this course together is that many young people in particular are joining this field, they're entering this profession, and depending on where they get assigned, they're going to have really good mentors who are showing them the ropes or not. If your first gig in the conservation community is in this county, your bosses and your mentors are going to get you off on the right foot. But if your first gig in the field is in the next county over, you're not off to as nearly as good of a start. So we put this course together to try and tap the secrets of the dark counties and spread them to the light counties. And here's who we got our input from. So you see there's over 50 organizations represented here. There's a lot of conservation districts are here on this list. You see a lot of NRCS on this list. There's also some nonprofit organizations like Michigan Trout Unlimited and the Potomac Conservancy and the Forestry Association. Our clients, MDARD, Michigan Association of Conservation Districts, Land Trust Alliance, beat the bushes, and they found mentors for us. We called them the Ag Whisperers, who really have the knack for earning the trust of landowners and getting them into a place where they can feel comfortable putting some of these practices in place. And that's whose brains we've picked. And here are some of the feedback, some of the kinds of things they were telling us. They tell us that rookies don't listen enough to the producer. They recommend practices before they really even know what the producer wants. It's a mistake to stay in the office. You need face time with farmers and landowners. It's a mistake to not stay organized, not being able to manage your time effectively. This is the kind of feedback that they were giving us as we put this course together. And that brings us to our very first exercise. And so this is the handout, which I sent around yesterday via email and made available to you again in the chat. And on page 1, I've got your 3 big takeaways. And so now our first exercise is a very simple one. I'm just going to put some stuff on the screen, and I want you to write it down with a pen on paper if you can. Let's get that muscle memory going. These are the 3 things that I hope a year from now, long after you have forgotten a lot of the detail that I'm going to be going into over this session and the next 2 sessions, I hope you'll remember at least these 3 things, and it will help you remember it if you take a minute to write it down. So here's the first one. The mentors open their pitch by offering to help the landowner with their problem, and they close the pitch by talking about the environmental benefits. I'll give you a second to write that down, and I'm going to explain that very thoroughly, what that means as we go through the course here this morning. That's your first top takeaway. They open their pitch by offering to help the landowner with their problem, and they close the pitch by talking about environmental benefits. Here's your second big takeaway. The mentors are diligent about networking in both the community at large and within the conservation community. I'll give you a minute to write that down. The mentors are diligent about networking in both the community at large and the conservation community. Here's your third big takeaway. The mentors are proactive about managing their workload. And now, here's the way the course is actually structured. So today I'm going to talk a lot about opening and closing the pitch. Next week we'll talk a lot about the networking. And in the final session, we'll talk a little bit about how they're managing their workload. So who are the rural landowners? Let's see what some of the data says. I think that not much of what I'm about to share is going to surprise you. I think at some level, many of you already know a little bit of this, but the data will nevertheless be enlightening. And as a marketer, it's my professional training to try and understand the audience I'm reaching out to as the first step, to have a really good sense of who they are and what they're like. So let's see what the data says. We're going to start with a little exercise. I'm going to pop you into your breakout rooms to do this. So you may want to put your webcams on for the discussion. So what I've got here, this is exercise number 1, and it's called By the Numbers. And what I have going down the left-hand column are some facts, some traits. Americans who live in rural areas, Americans who own 10 or more acres of forest, Americans who own farms, et cetera, et cetera. And down the right-hand column, I've got some percentages. But these percentages are scrambled from these traits. And so your exercise is to unscramble them. And I'll start by giving you a hint. And this line has somehow gotten a little bit skewed. Let's see if I can fix that actually. So giving you a little hint, on your handout, take your pen and draw a line here from Americans who own farms down to 1%, because just 1% of Americans own a farm of any size. 1% of Americans feed 99% of Americans. That's pretty amazing, actually. And this is a big change, which it matters for your work, because it used to be like 99% of us were farmers at some level. So I'm going to pop you into breakout groups for 4 minutes. And what I want you to do when you're in the breakout group is figure out where the rest of the lines go. 1% of Americans own farms. What's the percent who live in rural areas? What's the percent who have, what's the percent of forest owners that are 2 owners or more, et cetera, et cetera. If that's clear, here we go. And I'm going to pop you into the 2 breakout rooms. So there'll be 5 of you in each breakout room, and you'll be in there for 4 minutes. And here we go. So it looks like everybody's coming back. But my webcam is not coming back on.
I can see
Can
you.
you guys see me? Oh, there I am. All right, so I am back. Hang on. There we go. There we go. Okay, so I want to hear from breakout group 1, and that was Andrew, Heather, Janelle, Karen, and Christopher. What did you come up with top to bottom for our guessing exercise? Would one of you please take yourself off mute and share what you came up with?
Okay, I'm Heather. I happen to have the tally that we have so far.
Okay.
Americans who live in rural areas, we went with 18%. Americans who own 10 plus acres of forest, we went with 14%.
Okay.
American who owns farms, 1%.
Okay.
58 plus years old, 69%. Caucasian, 70%. Farmers who farm as their primary occupation, 44%. And that's as far as we got.
Those are pretty good guesses. Here are the actual results. It's 95% farm and forest owners who are Caucasian, 70%, 70% that use the internet at least sometimes. That's obviously really important for what we're talking about today. Of the private forest, the privately owned forest, the percent that have at least 2 owners is 69%. Farm owners who are over the age of 58 is 50%. That's the average there. Farmers who farm as their primary occupation is just 48%. Cash flow positive is 46%. Farms that have 2 or more owners is 44%. You're correct, 18% live in rural areas. Farm owners who are female is just 14%. Primary owner is female is just 14%. 10 or more acres of forest is just 3% of Americans. And, percent who owns a farm is obviously 1%. So here's a way of visualizing where these rural landowners fit into the population as a whole. So now, according to the U.S. Census, there's about 325 million of us, about 60 million of whom live in rural areas. And of those who live in rural areas, it's about 12 million of them that have land, have enough land to be a candidate for some of the types of programs that many of you may be offering. And that's about 4%. Less than 4% of the population are rural Americans who own enough land to be a candidate for a meaningful conservation project. That's 11 million family forests and about 2 million farms. So obviously there's some overlap between the forest and the farms, and nobody can really tell me how much that is. But 11 million family forests, 2 million farms, which works out to about less than 4% of Americans own about 70% of the land in the lower 48, which just underscores the urgency of working successfully with these landowners for conservation practices and cracking the code for being able to develop a trusting relationship with these individuals so they'll take a chance on some of these programs that can improve the, how they manage their land and benefit the water. Which is why some of our mentors say things like this: natural resource management and conservation is more about people management than anything else. Build trust. So now, forests and farms. People who own forests and people who own farms. They kind of look alike, but they're actually pretty different. The average age of a farmer is 58. The average age of a forest owner is 62. So they're pretty old on balance. They're both white, mostly white. And overwhelmingly, they are male. Old white guys Lots of old white guys out there own the land that surrounds the St. Joseph River and all the other rivers. So these two groups of people, they look a lot alike, but they actually think pretty different because, of course, farming is very active. They are actively managing, using, and seeking to make some kind of a profit from their land if they're a farmer. But what research finds is that those who own the private forest, for the most part, they are passive owners of this land. The percentage of female farmers is actually going down, according to the USDA. I don't know why that is. Meanwhile, the percentage of female forest owners is actually going up, and we can only speculate on why that is. In terms of their education levels, farmers tend to be below the national average in securing a 4-year college degree, while the woodland owners tend to be above that, above the average. So these groups of people look very similar, but they're pretty different in how they think about their land, with the woodland owners tending to have purchased that land or inherited that land, but not be making revenue off of it. And so now, if we watched a Hollywood movie about farmers, the cast would probably look like this. So here's Dad, and he farms full time. And here's Mom, and she helps out on the farm, but she has a job in town too. Maybe for health benefits would be a big reason for that. And here's Junior, who's planning on taking over the farm when Dad retires. Now, this is a great story. This is a classic American story, and we love to tell this story. But what the data shows is that what's really going on out there in rural America, particularly on the farmlands, isn't like this all that often. This story is out there, but it's by far not the most common one, because less than half of the farmers are farming as their primary occupation. For a little bit more than half, it's a side hustle, as we say now. Just 46% of those farms are cash flow positive. There are a lot of farms out there that are spending more than they take on their hobby farm, their part-time farm. Almost half of the farms have 2 or more owners, and that is a really big deal for the kinds of things that we're talking about today, and I'm going to come back to that again and again. The land is owned and managed by multiple family members, and that's a big consideration. Just 18% of the farms are generating more than $100,000 in annual revenue. That's not profit in the pocket of the farmer. That's annual total revenue coming into the farm. Most of the farms are really small. They don't make a lot of money. They actually spend a little bit more than they make. Now let's talk about those forests, and we'll start to get into some of the language issues that we're going to be finding here, because we like to use the word forest, but outside of our professional community, the word forest, it is a positive word. People like forest, but the connotation when you say forest is that people think of something that's pretty big. They think Smokey the Bear, they think Georgia Pacific, they think state forests, they think big forests. And what most people are tending to call their small patch of trees is the woods. And so if we're talking about a forest management plan, we're talking about forestry services. For a lot of our rural landowners, that word is going to conjure up something that they like, but they don't think is them. So now the woods have multiple owners as well. In more than two-thirds of the cases, there's going to be more than one owner. It might be a husband and wife. It might be a brother and sister. There's some kind of father and son. There's some kind of multi-generational, multi-family member ownership pattern for the woodlands that we are hoping are going to be better managed. And that means that instead of one person making the decision about what happens in the woods, it's 2, possibly even 3 people who have to get together and come to agreement on what they're going to do with their woods. The predominant reasons that private citizens own woods are soft amenities. Here's a list. This is from the National Woodland Owner Survey again. And the top reasons are beauty, wildlife, nature, legacy, and privacy. Things that in the mind of most Americans who own these forests don't require them to actively manage it. The forest takes care of itself is what they are mostly thinking, with relatively small numbers of those landowners being interested in timber and the NTFPs, which stands for non-timber forest products. Apparently, I just learned that putting this particular class together. Only really a very small percentage of the landowners who have private woodlands are actually harvesting those trees or harvesting something from that woods. And far more often, it's they like how they look, they like that there's animals in there, it's the privacy, et cetera, et cetera. Very few of these private landowners, particularly those who are not actively harvesting their timber, are getting any kind of assistance or actively managing their forest in any way. The largest block, both in terms of ownership and in terms of acre, are not getting management advice. They're not in a tax incentive program. They don't have a management plan. They haven't applied for cost share. They haven't put an easement in place. They're not green certified. All of these types of active stewardship of the forest, this kind of behavior is pretty rare compared to those who just have the woods and they think the woods take care of itself. Which means when we're working with a farmer, and we're hoping that they might change the way they're running their farm, we're talking to somebody who is actively managing that land currently and may be open to some kind of a change if it's going to be easier, more profitable, solve some kind of problem for them. When we're talking to woodland owners, more often than not, we're talking to individuals who have never really actively thought about stewardship of their forest. They have the woods, they like the woods, it's privacy, they can't see the neighbors, they can't hear the street, but that they think that woods takes care of itself. Now, hard data about the plain sect is very difficult to come by, just so you know. But for the plain sect, our mentors did warn against overgeneralizing. Because many of us in mainstream America are not particularly familiar with the plain sect, we tend to assume that they are more similar than it turns out that they are. And our mentors tell us, well, of course, plain sect are people, and some of them are funny, and some of them are grumpy, and some of them are visionary about their land, and others are very focused on the bottom line. And then the word plain sect is a pretty big umbrella with lots of different subsects underneath. One of our mentors said we have the Byler Amish, the Peachy Amish, the Nebraska Amish, the Halderman and Beachy Amish, the Gospel Lighters, the Carr Amish, the Amish Mennonites, and the list goes on. Each of these subsectors having some differences from the rest. So now we're going to do a little bit of an exercise with rural landowners and the stories that they have. That's some of the hard data, which is really helpful to know. But when you are in a negotiation with a landowner, you're talking to an individual, not a statistic, and they're going to have a lot of personal reasons for doing the things that they do and they don't do. So on pages 2 through 4 of your handouts, here is the exercise, and I'm going to put you back in the break. Well, actually, I'm going to do this as an individual exercise. You're going to do this as for yourself rather than as a group. So what you have here are the stories and a little bit of demographic information about 10 rural landowners. We've got some big farmers and some small farmers, and we got some people who have trees and some people who don't, et cetera, et cetera. And so what I want you to do is take a couple of minutes and read through these stories and tell me which one of these seems most like a landowner that you would be likely to encounter in your work. Which one of these seems most like a landowner you would be likely to encounter in your work, and what kind of problems could you help them with? And what kind of deals might you be able to close with them? Could you put a conservation easement on the land? Could you help them get a nutrient management plan? Could you help them get a forest management plan? Could you help them get a stream buffer in? What problems are they spending their day trying to solve? What kind of deals would you close? I'm going to give each of you 4 minutes to familiarize yourself with these landowners and pick one, and then I'll call on you to call on some of you to tell me what you came up with. So here we go, 4 minutes. All right, I'm curious what you came up with. I'm just going to start working down the list here. So let me start with Tom Bakula. Tom, which of these landowners seems most like someone you would actually encounter in your work? Can you take yourself off mute?
David, right off the bat, seemed like somebody that would come in. He seems to have some cash flow issues or need some cash to help his kids out, where you could help him out with that with a forest management plan and some timber harvest. and depending on what the property is, perhaps some permanent conservation easements, because he really likes the land and doesn't want to sell like many of the other people.
Terrific. Great, Tom. Let me hear from Ross. What did you come up with, Ross? Ross, can you take yourself off mute? I see you're unmuted, Ross, but I still can't hear you.
Can you hear me
How
there?
about Heather? Now I can hear you. Let's
Sorry
hear from
about
Ross.
that, Eric. I guess going through the list, I can see several of these landowners. I mean, and we work a lot of times through watershed organizations or lake associations, and so it's across the board as far as who you might run into, but there's opportunities to stabilize farm ditches or streams or even restore wetland acreage that we might utilize either grant opportunities at the state or local level or cost share programs. And I guess a class like this is helpful in that some of these approaches, although there's a lot of different personalities and people here, I think are universal as far as approaching people and working with them.
Terrific, Ross. Thank you. Let me hear one more. How about Heather? Who did you come up with?
I would go with George because we have some cattle that we could focus on for exclusion fencing and offer them alternatives for getting water to their cattle.
Okay. Terrific. So that is just kind of a thought exercise. But what I want you to do is remember who you chose, because we're going to be doing a lot of the exercises will be around that individual. You're going to write emails to them. You're going to leave voicemails for them. So you want to keep in mind whichever landowner it was you chose, and for whichever kind of practice you might be hoping to help them with, keep that in mind. We're going to need that as the course goes on. So now we're going to get really into the heart of what it takes to successfully open and close pitches with landowners, and that is the perceived barriers and benefits of conservation practices, benefits and barriers. Now this is Steve Law, he's with USDA, and this is the only picture he could find of himself to send me. It looks like he's climbing into a World War II fighter plane to go shoot down some Nazis or something. But he says, people don't buy into what we are selling for the reasons we think they should. They buy into them for their own reasons. And so as a marketer, we understand that people have their own reasons for doing whatever it is we hope they're going to do. And we need to understand what those reasons are. And so now this takes us back to our central point here, that mentors open their pitch by offering to help the landowners with their problem, and then they close the pitch by talking about the environmental benefits. Now in the world of sales, opening and closing are the yin and the yang. They are both super important to getting to where you got to be. In order to have the conversation, you have to have a good open. And in order to close your deal, you have to have a good close. These are equally important, but the sequence is critical, is that you open by talking about how you're going to help them, and then you close by talking about how it's going to help the natural environment. Now, so this is a marketing terminology here. We have the benefits and we have the barriers. And the benefits is what makes the landowner say, that sounds good. It answers the question, what's in it for me? Do I make more money? Do I have less hassle? Are my cows less likely to get sick? Am I going to lose less soil? Those are all things that landowners want. And you're going to try and give them some of that. That's the benefit. That's going to appeal to them. But then it's not quite that easy. It never really is. Then there are barriers. There are things that cool the landowners interest in that practice. Maybe it's going to be too expensive. Maybe it's going to take too long. Maybe I'm going to lose too much land that I could have in production, et cetera, et cetera. For nearly all of the practices that you mentioned in the previous exercise, there are benefits to the landowner from them that are attractive, but then there are also barriers that we need to overcome. And so I'm going to illustrate the benefits and the barriers and the what's in it for me and the what's in it for them here. So here we are at some kind of a horse farm. And you see there's a horse running around, and look at all this mud. That's an issue, all that mud. And here I have a woman hugging a tree. She's a stand-in for all of you guys, whether you hug trees or not. And then we have the landowner. So now we see all this mud, and what does she see? She says, I want to fix that mud to stop the sedimentation. She sees all this mud here, and she knows that every time it rains, some of that mud is going to end up in the nearest creek. It's a sediment problem. And that's legit. It's true. It's real. But meanwhile, the landowner here says, I want to fix that mud pit because my horses keep losing their shoes in there. It's the same problem. She sees it one way. He sees it another way. There is room here to make a deal and fix this, but she needs to recognize where he's coming from and start there. So that brings us to the next exercise. I am going to put you back in the breakout rooms for that. And it looks like breakout room number 1 has 5 and breakout room number 2 has 3. So Christopher, I am going to move you to the second room here in just a flash. So here is the exercise. This is page 5. We've got a artwork of a farm here, and then we've got the landowner and we've got the tree hugger. And here's a full screen view of that. So this farm is a mess. There's lots of things not going right on the farm here. And you can see that because here's the farmer looking at him, eyes wide. He's just like, oh my God, my farm's a mess. And here we have the conservation professional. You see he has Planet Earth on his shirt. And he's looking at the farm and he's like, oh my God, we got a mess. We got a lot of work to do. And so there are some bubbles here, the numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, et cetera, et cetera. And what I want you to do is to basically recreate the exercise. She sees the sedimentation. He sees horses losing their shoes. What does the tree hugger see here with the concentrated animal feeding lot? What's the problem as he sees it? What's the problem as he sees it? So for the first one here we've got the barn, we got the family all around. This is number 1. We got the barn around the family. And what the landowner sees is that after several generations, the farm might not stay in the family. One of the big crises facing agriculture in this country right now, he's on average 58 years old, and it is unlikely that his son or daughter wants to take over the farm. So he is concerned that he might be the last one on the farm, the last family member to own the farm. Meanwhile, the tree hugger over here, that's you, it's a term of affection if I'm doing it, is worried that the farm might get sold to developers. And so instead of having a dirty farm, you're going to have a big subdivision or a shopping center. So I'm going to put you into the breakout rooms for 6 minutes, 7 minutes, and I want you to do the same thing for the rest of them. What's the problem here as the farmer would see it? What's the problem here as someone like yourself might see it? What's the problem here as a farmer would see it? What's the problem here as someone like yourself might see it? So I'm going to stick you into the breakout rooms for 7 minutes, and we'll see what you come up with.
Hey, Eric, this is Leah.
Yep.
I am having trouble with my app. It's on a mobile device. Could you try putting me in the breakout room again? The prompt didn't work.
All right, let's try. I'm going to put you in breakout room 1.
Thanks.
I think you have to accept it. There you are.
So that's an opportunity from the tree hugger perspective, and then the farmer might be complaining like, it's always wet.
Yeah, I think you've just rejoined the main room.
Dang.
You've lost your companions. They'll be back in 30 seconds.
Okay. Oh, maybe I hit the button early. I'm not sure what happened. It's been buggy for me today on the phone. I don't usually do this on my phone.
I've never tried it on the phone.
It's not been going very well so far. The chat
Small
box,
screen for all this stuff.
small screen, and then the chat box is I'm not seeing anything written there, so won't be doing this again.
Everybody is popping back into the main room now. So let me hear from breakout room number 2. That's Christopher, Matt, Ross, and Tom. What did you come up with for, tell me about 2 or 3 of these that you had the most interesting discussion around.
Well, I shared with my group about the number 4, the cattle in the stream one, which is sort of a one that's real obvious for the tree hugger what the problem is. Seems like pretty direct pollution source. And there's a lot of work that's been done in LaGrange County, which is where we have a lot of our plain sect in the watershed, around the problems for the landowner. There is animal health, and possibly some increased ditch maintenance, which costs the landowner money. The county assesses them for digging out the ditch, and if the cows are trampling down the edge, it's adding to the sediment in the stream. So we talked quite a bit about that one.
Okay. How about another one from your group?
Chris, you want to help me out? Tom, anybody?
Yeah, another one we talked about was number 2, with the I guess from the tree hugger's perspective, if we wanted to get from that angle, just how to manage the waste either on site or having some type of buffer put in to help capture the flow. It looks like when rain happens, the manure is going down. So working with the farm owner on either creating silos or a proper waste lagoon. I guess from the landowner or the farmer's perspective, he might see it as potentially a problem. If the rain flows too much, it could flow back into the barn and cause maybe health problems or flies or other things that could cause maybe health for his wildlife or for his livestock, I mean.
Terrific. So let me hear from breakout group number 1. That's Andrew, Heather, Janelle, Karen, and Leah. Tell me about one of these that you had an interesting discussion around.
Well, oh, go ahead.
Oh, one we actually struggled to name was number 7, the pooling of water by the barn, but then we thought maybe that's an opportunity for a wetland, and the landowner's just seeing it as a nuisance, and it's always wet and he's trying to figure out how to fix it, but maybe it should just be wet and be turned into a wetland.
How about another one from that group?
Number 5, the animals being so close to the water would be obviously a E. coli threat, and even just tramping down the riverside planting, ruining the filter strip. And then the water for livestock would be the concern by the landowner.
Okay, very good. So here's some of the answers that our mentors had came up with when we were putting this together. So, for that CAFO, the farmers got manure storage and compliance hassles. And of course, we see the water and air pollution. Loss of topsoil for number 3. That's the annual crops on the slope to the creek. And again, the annual crops on marginal. And you're losing a lot of that really valuable topsoil. That is a resource for the farmer, but of course it takes sediment and chemicals into the waterways. Matt mentioned that having the cows have access to the stream is a health issue for the cows. We are very focused in the conservation community. We want to protect the stream from the livestock. But from the farmer's perspective, a lot of the time it's, I want to protect the livestock from the stream. I want to protect the livestock from the stream. I don't want my heifers giving birth in the stream. I don't want their udders in that dirty water. I don't want them going up and down a steep and dangerous slope to get to the water, potentially breaking a leg and other kinds of things that can go wrong. We want to protect the stream from the cattle, but the farmer might well be interested in protecting the cattle from the stream. So the water around the barnyard, this was a Michigan example, and one of our mentors said that, you know, if you're getting water pooling around your barn, if it's running into the barn and the barn's really muddy, and you can help that farmer by putting gutters on the farm. That's called that the gateway drug, as a small thing that you can do to help the farmer that will earn a lot of trust for some of the bigger things that you might want to do later. So now we're going to revisit that exercise. This is now on page 6. And take a look at the farm now. It's beautiful. Oh my God, there's no manure piled up here. We got different crops planted. We got a fence that's in here, and there's a well, and there's no water around the barn. There's a silt fence around the development. So what happened? What kind of deals? Here they are shaking their hand on all the good work that they've done on this farm. So, to give you an example, here's some of the deals that they closed. Farmer doesn't want to lose the farm. He doesn't want to be the last one in the family to have the farm. We helped him get some tax breaks, some cost share, some easements, all these things that reduced the operating costs, increased the profitability of the farm, and made it more attractive for the next generation to take over that farm. What are the rest of the deals that we might have closed to make some of these things happen? I'm going to put you back into the breakout rooms and let you figure it out. So I think you're all back now. Let me hear from group one. That's Andrew, Heather, Janelle, Karen, and Leah. What were some of the deals that these two folks right here closed that led to those improvements?
Number 3, buffer planting could be CRP land.
Okay, that's a good one. Can you give me one more?
Exclusion fencing and watering alternate for 4 and 5.
And what program would pay for those or help those happen?
I'm not sure.
Okay. Let me hear from breakout group 2. That's Christopher, Matt, Ross, and Tom. What did you come up with for a couple of these?
Well, regarding the one that Heather was just working on with the alternate watering source and the restriction fencing, we talked about, you know, some USDA programs that offer cost share. I think they got acronyms like EQIP or CREP or something like that. I don't know, but I know there's some programs out there for that.
That point that you just made, Matt, you don't know all the acronyms, you don't know the ins and outs of all the programs. I'm going to come back to that. That's actually really a big part of the story here. So I cut you off. What was your other example?
Well, we just talked about the manure storage of some kind, probably under the building, that allowed the farmer to maintain his precious fertilizer and, you know, for us, kept the manure out of the creek. But again, assuming there's some kind of USDA program that kind of helps with lagoons or some kind of storage under the building. I'm thinking they might have found a solution with that. And then the annual crops that were on the steep slopes, looks like, you know, it's hard to tell from a cartoon picture, but that maybe we switched to some kind of perennial crops that still offered the landowner some ability to harvest a food source, but at the same time wasn't losing the topsoil that he was losing before.
Okay, terrific. So here is the list, which of course you'll get in the recording later. So now going on to page 7 through 9, we picked out 5 practices that seem to be really common of interest to conservation professionals like yourselves all across the country. So we've got the riparian buffers. We've got the converting cropland to perennials. We've got the livestock exclusion. We've got the no-till and the cover crops. We've got the nutrient management, and we've got the conservation easements. And for each of these, we polled our mentors and we got all their input. And we have on the left-hand side of each of these tables is the potential benefits that a farmer or a landowner might perceive from these practices. So like for the example of the riparian buffers, which is nearly universal interest among conservationists, you know, it can eliminate high-risk calving areas, because if a heifer gives birth to a calf in the stream, that calf might not make it. You can improve your grazing management and your herd movement. The fences can make it easier to move your cattle around the land. Reduces erosion, obviously, of your precious topsoil. Less areas that have to be mowed. You might get a CREP rental payment. It might be required to get access to some other cost share that you really want, et cetera, et cetera. These are the benefits of the riparian buffer. But there are also reasons that landowners don't want to do the riparian buffer. They may be concerned about losing land from production. They might not think it looks very nice. They're wondering what the neighbors might think if they worked with the district or the NRCS. Some of the plants that we like to see in riparian areas, they might not like. It can be hassle to maintain that buffer, the fence, et cetera, et cetera. And of course, the CREP contract is for a certain period of time and has certain requirements that they may object to. Benefits for the riparian buffer, objections to the riparian buffer. And we've got pretty good lists for these 6 practices that many of you told me at the start of the course that you're interested in. And there we have it. I was really surprised when we were putting this training together that this list was not readily available. I would have assumed, given how long the history is of conservation professionals trying to work with rural landowners to improve stewardship, that you would see a handy list like this somewhere, but we didn't find one. So I have a hunch that in the years to come, maybe the most valuable takeaway of this, particularly if you're new in the field, would be this item right here that is pages 7 through 9 of your handout. Now, for the plain sect, there are some additional barriers that mostly have to do with mechanization and appearance. And I'm not going to dwell on this a great deal because only a couple of you on the line have any interest in the plain sect at all. But I found this old book called The Amish and the Mennonites, and this is, you can just look at it and see how old it is. But the quote in here was really telling. It says, if God had not been entirely responsible for the success of these people, the answer must lie in the fact that when they plowed deeper to keep the soil mellow, and when they cleared away the forest land, they went to work on the hardiest of the trees as well as the smaller growth. And what our mentors find working with the plain sect is that for many of them, the plowing is a cultural touchstone, not just a farming technique. And they also believe that bad fences cause trouble between neighbors. And more broadly, we heard from our mentors that the plain sect tend to be quite fastidious about the tidy appearance of their farms, and things like riparian buffers, where we think that wild look is healthy and natural and attractive, and for many of them that seems to be unkempt and untidy. Our mentors basically told us that the plain sect are less receptive to many of the practices that we might hope that they were going to be receptive, and with the exception of nutrient management. They found that they reported that plain sect are more receptive to nutrient management techniques than conventional farmers. And we also heard that in conventional farming, no-till and cover crops tend to be the same thing. One goes hand in hand with the other, but with the plain sect farmers, they are receptive to the cover crops, but less receptive to the no-till because plowing the land is a cultural touchstone for many of them. So now pages 7 through 9 for the exercises. Let's talk a little bit about this one conversation. So this is over on the easements practice. And my client with the Land Trust Alliance told me about a time that she had sat down and she was talking to a rural landowner about putting an easement on the land, and she had walked them through the terms of this document, and the landowner looked her in the eye and said, does this mean that if I sign this easement, my kids and my grandkids can't subdivide this land, put a house on this land, they can't clear this land, there's all these things. I am tying the hands of my heirs so they cannot change the way the land is. And my client was squirming, and she said, well, yes, that's exactly what it means. And the landowner said, well, that's exactly what I want. So boom, we have a deal. But now, by the same token, there are going to be other landowners who are going to have the exact opposite reaction. They're going to say, I'm not willing to tie my kids' hands. It's once I hand the land over to them, it's theirs, and I want them to be able to do what they want or need to do. So one landowner might say, I put the easement on my farm so my kids wouldn't fight over what to do with it when I'm gone. That's another quote that one of our mentors gave us, an actual time where a landowner cited one of these benefits or one of these barriers when deciding yes to put something in place or no not to. And so what I want you to do is take a couple of minutes. This is an individual exercise. I'm going to give you a few minutes to look through these benefits and barriers, and I want some of you to come back and tell me a story about a time where a landowner cited something like this as the reason they put the practice in place. I didn't put the easement in to save the land for nature. I put it in place to protect it from my kids. I didn't put the riparian buffer in place to protect the stream. I put the riparian buffer in place to protect the cattle. I want you to tell me a story about when a landowner cited a non-environmental benefit, for the practice that you helped them put into place. I'll give you a couple minutes to look it over, and then I'll see who has a story that they want to share. Okay, I hope that's enough time. If one of you has a story that you would like to share about a time that a landowner cited a non-environmental benefit for a conservation practice, would you raise your hand so I can see who you are and I'll call on you? Anybody? Or you can hit the yes button if you can't find the hand raise. Nobody has a story. Oh, Matt's got one. Matt, let's see if anybody else has one to offer. All right, Matt, let's hear your story.
Sorry, Eric. I'm full of them. I guess I haven't done a ton of direct one-on-one with the farmers, but I've got two stories that I think are secondhand. One of them is with trying to promote the use of manure injection rather than applying on the surface. And, you know, from our standpoint as conservationists, we're real interested in the not nutrient loss, like keeping nutrients on the soil, not losing the nitrogen to the atmosphere and runoff. And for my friends who are hog farmers, their reason for doing it was smell with the neighbors, that it reduced smell and made them better neighbors to the people that were in their community. And so that was their primary reason for doing it.
That's a great example.
Then also got one with cover crops and no-till. And this one wasn't so much someone doing it for the first time, but rather continuing to use it. There was a tax incentive program. And although they didn't actually own much of their land, they're always in competition with other farmers to be the tenant on this land. And because they were no-till cover croppers, the landowner received a tax break through this program we were promoting, and it allowed them to look like the superior tenant to the landowner. So it helped sort of cement that relationship between the landlord and the tenant.
Oh yeah, that's a great example. That's a really great example. Okay, so the last thing we're gonna do is we're opening and closing the pitch. And the point is that the mentors open their pitch by offering to help the landowner with their problem. And they close the pitch by talking about the environmental benefits. And I've got a couple of examples to show you how that goes. So here we have two individuals. This one is the conservation professional, and this one is the landowner. And he says, actually, I'm going to go on to this example. Better fences will help you get your cattle back to the barn faster. That's the opening. He's opening by talking about how improving fencing on the land is a convenience for the farmer. That's the open. Here's the close. And because it will help protect the stream, I can help you put them in. Open by promising to help the landowner. Close by talking about how it helps the environment. Opening and closing are the yin and yang of sales, and they are equally important, but the opening has to come first and the closing has to come second. And a lot of rookie conservation professionals tend to try and open with the environmental benefits when they should be opening with the benefits to the landowner. And then you close with the benefits to the landowner when you should be closing with the benefits to the environment. Here's another example. We can protect your investment in this vineyard by controlling erosion. Protect your investment is a benefit to the farmer. That's the open. And because it will keep public waterways clear, I can offer technical and financial assistance. That's the close.
Hey,
Okay,
Eric,
so now, yep, go ahead, Matt.
just a quick, so when you first put that slide up with the opening and the closing, I was sort of skeptical of the need to pull in the environmental benefit. I've tended to stay away from it and just thinking it wasn't important. I start with I lead with the what's it do for you and close with the what's it do for you. But I think I just realized what I'm missing with that is the trust that you can build with the landowner by being, this is why I'm here. This is, otherwise one of your examples, I think the person was skeptical of the help because like, why would you want to help me get the cattle back to the barn faster? That doesn't.
Right.
So that's good. Sorry, I just want to share that.
Yeah, I mean, it's about transparency that, you are upfront and honest with the landowners about your motives and the reason that there are potentially public tax dollars available to help them. And it legitimizes you as the conservation district or the NRCS or the watershed association or the land trust, because you're trying here to earn their trust that you really do understand that they have a business that they're trying to run and keep profitable, and that you have that in your mind. But then it's about, credibility and candor and disclosure that my agenda is I'm funded for conservation purposes, and that's what I'm here for and why I have these resources to offer you. So at the top of the hour, I had you go through and pick out a landowner that seemed like one that you were going to work with. And so what I want you to do is take 3 minutes and come up with your opening to that landowner. What are you going to say to open? And then how would you close? And this is kind of our final exercise of the day. So I'm going to hear from a couple of you on that. I'll give you 3 minutes to think it through. Individual exercise, not a group exercise. And then we'll hear what you came up with. Okay, I'm back, and I'm curious what you came up with. I would love to hear from Janelle. Janelle, would you take yourself off mute? Tell us which landowner you are speaking with, and open and close for me.
Can you hear me?
I can.
Okay, good. I keep losing internet or internet hits. And I chose James. He's a de facto property owner for his parents' county estate. Basically, he's waiting to inherit the land that he wants to sell, and he's dealing with issues with insect infestation, which is killing more and more of the trees. So my open to him is basically I can help you address the insect infestation that's killing your trees and improve the property when you go to sell it. So you'll get more money in the end. And the close is basically because you will be addressing forest management issues. I have a program I can assist you with either through NRCS programs, maybe a DNR program, or maybe a program Soil and Water may have at the time.
Terrific, Janelle. Thank you very much. Let me hear from Andrew. What did you come up with, Andrew?
So I was looking at Richard, who wants to learn more about sustainable farming practices, but doesn't have control of the land. And my opening will be something like, you can call the shots on our land that we lease to you. and you can use the latest sustainable ag practices. And the close would be that you can do this through support from the land trusts I represent, and we can use XYZ conservation program that we will help manage for you.
Terrific, Andrew. Thank you. Let's do one more. Can I hear from Karen? Karen, can you take yourself off mute?
I know she was having some technical difficulties earlier.
Then let's hear from Ross.
So one of the property owners that might be good to approach is David, who is having trouble, looks like, with the financial part of his property, is considering selling it to a developer. One thing working in finding mitigation sites for wetlands and streams is there might be an opportunity on his property that we can allow him to keep his land to restore some of the hunting and fishing that he loves to have on a property, also provide him funds to help some of the farming that he's also doing on the land. And in return, we're able to restore stream feet, wetland acreage for our state-run programs.
Okay, terrific. Thank you, Ross. All right, everybody, that's going to bring us to more or less to the end. So I'm going to open the floor now for any questions any of you may have about what we've covered so far, or if you want to share some of your thoughts and your experiences with some of the others on the line. If there's no, oh, do I hear someone coming off mute? Okay, well then let's talk about what's going to happen next. So this is
Eric. It looks like maybe Ross kind of raised his hand with a yes, maybe.
I did, and I was gonna pass, but I was thinking earlier, one good opportunity that we had to kind of to work with a local group that had property ownership of two low-head dams that were both financially and from a maintenance and a safety standpoint were really kind of a burden to them. And we're currently working with them to remove those dams, and obviously it's the aquatic and riparian benefits that come with that. We're able to fund it with state money, and it was really an easy sell because we were able to provide the benefit up front for them before. I mean, in this case, they were also happy to provide the environmental benefit as well. But that was one example.
Terrific, Ross. Thank you. Any other questions or anything else that anybody wants to share with the others on the line? Well, this is a three-part course, and so obviously we've just completed the first course, and the key takeaway is that the mentors are opening their pitch by talking about how they can solve the landowner's problem, and Ross gave a really good example there. And they close the pitch by talking about the environmental benefits as a way of earning trust for being transparent about your motives and justifying why there's public funds available to help. We will meet again next Tuesday at the same time using the same basic format. And what we'll focus on then is the networking and the relationship building and the marketing that goes into developing a steady pipeline of landowners who are considering working with you on a project like this. So hold on to that handout. I'll send it around next week, but you do want to have it. If you have a chance to print it out on paper, you can see how that might be helpful. And until then, stay healthy, stay safe, and good luck with your work. I'm looking forward to chatting with you all on Tuesday.